I was kicked out of my home because of my sister's lie. 8 years later, they want front row seats at my wedding. I've gone back and forth on whether I should even write this. Part of me wants to keep the past buried where it belongs, but another part of me knows that silence is what allowed everything to happen in the first place. So here it is, my side of the story, the part no one wanted to hear back then. I grew up in what looked like a normal family from the outside. 2 parents, 2 kids, a modest house, in a quiet neighborhood. My sister, Emily, is 3 years younger than me. To everyone else, she was sweet, sensitive, and fragile. To my parents, she was their miracle child. To me, she was complicated. I was the responsible one, the quiet one, the kid who followed rules without being asked. Emily, on the other hand, had a talent for turning chaos into sympathy. If something broke, it was never her fault. If she cried, the whole house stopped to comfort her. I learned early on that in our family, emotions mattered more than facts. Things really started to change when I was 16. Emily had entered that stage where everything felt dramatic and every small problem became a crisis. She argued constantly with my parents, struggled in school, and blamed everyone else for it. Somehow, I always ended up caught in the middle. One night, everything shattered. It was a Tuesday. I remember that clearly because Tuesdays were leftovers for dinner nights. I had just finished my homework when I heard shouting downstairs. My mom's voice was sharp, panicked. My dad's was low and angry. Then Emily screamed. I ran down the stairs, heart pounding, only to find her sitting on the couch in tears. My parents stood over her like guards. When they turned and looked at me, the air felt heavy, like something had already been decided. "Tell him," my mom said softly to Emily. Emily looked at me through red, trembling eyes and said words that would change my life forever. She accused me of something I didn't do, something serious, something unforgivable in their eyes. The room went silent. I remember laughing at first, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. I genuinely thought it was some kind of misunderstanding. I tried to explain. I begged them to ask questions, to think logically, to look at me like they had my entire life. They didn't. My father's face hardened in a way I had never seen before. My mother wouldn't even meet my eyes. Within an hour, they told me I couldn't stay there anymore. No investigation, no conversation, no chance to defend myself. They said it was for everyone's safety. I packed a duffel bag with shaking hands while Emily cried loudly in the other room. I kept waiting for someone to stop me, for one of my parents to realize how wrong this was. No one did. I left that night and slept on a friend's couch, staring at the ceiling until morning. I kept thinking, they'll call tomorrow. They'll realize this doesn't make sense. They never did. The days turned into weeks, weeks into months. My parents stopped responding to my messages entirely. Extended family quietly distanced themselves. Word spread, but not the truth, just the accusation. At 17, I learned what it felt like to be erased. I finished high school barely holding myself together. I worked odd jobs, stayed wherever I could, and learned how to survive without a safety net. I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. I had to keep going. What hurt the most wasn't losing my home. It was losing the people who were supposed to know me best. Years passed. I built a life from scratch. I went to college. I found a career. I made friends who became my chosen family. Slowly, painfully, I started to trust again. And then I met her. She didn't know my past at first. She only knew the man I had become: careful, loyal, maybe a little guarded. When I finally told her everything, I expected doubt. Instead, she believed me without hesitation. That was the moment I realized how deeply my parents' betrayal had scarred me. When I proposed last year, it felt like a victory I never imagined I'd have. I was happy, genuinely happy, and that's when my parents reached out. After years of silence, they said they'd heard about the engagement through relatives. They said they wanted to reconnect. They said they wanted to be part of my wedding, as if nothing had ever happened, as if they hadn't thrown me out without a second thought, as if my sister's lie hadn't cost me my family. I stared at my phone for a long time after reading their message. My hands weren't shaking this time. I wasn't 17 anymore. But the question remained the same. Do I owe anything to people who abandoned me when I needed them most? I didn't reply to my parents' message right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I knew exactly what I wanted to say. And I was afraid of how it would sound if I finally let myself be honest. 8 years of silence doesn't disappear just because someone types, "We'd love to reconnect." For a full week, their message sat unread after that first glance. I focused on work, on wedding planning, on pretending it didn't exist. But the truth has a way of creeping in when things get quiet. Late one night, I showed the message to my fiance. She read it slowly, then looked up at me and asked the simplest question anyone had asked me about my family in years. What do you want? That question hit harder than I expected, because for most of my life, what I wanted never mattered. After I was kicked out, my parents made it clear, without saying it outright, that I was no longer welcome in their lives. I wasn't invited to holidays. I wasn't told when relatives got sick or passed away. My name was quietly removed from family conversations. At first, I kept trying. I sent messages on birthdays. I called on holidays. I wrote long emails explaining my side of the story, breaking everything down logically, hoping something would click. Nothing ever did. Eventually, I stopped. Not because it didn't hurt anymore, but because the rejection hurt worse than the silence. In those early years, I replayed that night constantly. Every word Emily said, every look on my parents' faces. I kept asking myself if there was something I could have done differently. The answer was always the same. They never wanted the truth. They wanted an explanation that fit their fear. And Emily gave them exactly that. About 2 years after I was kicked out, I ran into my mom at the grocery store. I almost didn't recognize her at first. She looked older, tired. When our eyes met, I saw recognition flicker across her face, followed by something colder. Guilt. She didn't smile. She didn't ask how I was. She just said, "I hope you're staying out of trouble." That was it. No apology, no curiosity, no doubt. That was the moment I realized something that took me years to fully accept. They had chosen their version of events, and choosing me would mean admitting they were wrong. And they were never going to do that. Fast forward to the present. After sitting with my parents' message for days, I finally responded with something neutral. "I'm surprised to hear from you. What made you reach out now?" The reply came within minutes. They said they'd been thinking a lot lately. They said time had given them perspective. They said family should be together for milestones. They didn't say the word sorry, not once. They asked where the wedding would be held, asked if they could help, asked if Emily would be invited too. That last question made my chest tighten. I hadn't thought about my sister in years, not because I didn't care, but because thinking about her reopened wounds that never fully healed. Emily was 14 when she accused me. 14 is old enough to know right from wrong, but according to my parents, she was still just a child who felt scared. I was 17. Apparently, I was old enough to be disposable. I asked my parents something I had been holding back for nearly a decade. "Do you still believe her?" There was a long pause before their response. Then my mom replied, "We believe she felt unsafe." That wasn't an answer. That was avoidance dressed up as compassion. I pushed further. I told them I needed honesty before I could even consider having them in my life again. I said I couldn't pretend the past never happened. My dad finally responded. "We did what we thought was best at the time. No apology, no accountability, just justification." I stared at my phone and felt something unexpected, not anger, clarity. For years, I had carried the weight of their decision like it was my burden to bear. Like I needed to earn my way back into their lives. Like I had something to prove. But reading their words now, I understood something important. They weren't reaching out because they regretted what they did. They were reaching out because I was doing well. They had heard about my job, my engagement, my stability, and suddenly, I was worth acknowledging again. A few days later, Emily messaged me directly. Her message was short, polite, carefully worded. She said she hoped I was doing okay. She said she'd love to put the past behind us. She said the wedding would be a beautiful, fresh start. She didn't mention the accusation. She didn't mention the night I was kicked out. She didn't mention the years I spent rebuilding my life alone. I asked her one question: "Why did you lie?" Her response came hours later. She said she didn't remember things the same way I did. She said emotions were high back then. She said she never meant for things to go so far. Never meant. As if I had simply wandered away instead of being thrown out. That's when it hit me. None of them were ready to tell the truth. They just wanted access to my happiness without acknowledging the damage they caused. My fiance watched all of this quietly, patiently. She never pushed me in either direction. She just reminded me that this was our wedding. Not a family reunion, not a chance at redemption for anyone else. Mine. For the first time, I started thinking less about forgiveness and more about boundaries. And that scared me more than confrontation ever did. Because boundaries mean accepting that some people will never change. At the end of the week, my parents asked again, so I gave them an answer. Not the final one, but the first honest one I'd ever given. "I'm not ready to include you in the wedding. There are things we need to address first." They didn't take it well, and what they said next would make it very clear that this wasn't about reconciliation at all. When I told my parents I wasn't ready to include them in the wedding, The tone of the conversation changed immediately. The warmth vanished. The politeness cracked. And underneath it all, the pressure came rushing back. My mom replied first. "I don't understand why you're holding on to this after all these years." That sentence alone told me everything I needed to know. To her, it was this, a vague, inconvenient thing I was stubbornly clinging to. Not the night I lost my home, not the years of isolation, not the reputation I never got to defend, just this. My dad followed up a few minutes later. "We're your parents. We won't be around forever." There it was, the guilt. They weren't asking how I felt. They weren't acknowledging what they'd done. They were reminding me of my obligation. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I went for a long walk, the kind where you don't bring your phone and you let your thoughts spiral until they finally settle into something solid. I thought about 17-year-old me, standing in my bedroom, shoving clothes into a bag while my parents waited downstairs. I remembered how my hands shook, how I kept listening for footsteps, hoping someone would come up and stop me. No one ever did. I thought about birthdays spent working late shifts instead of celebrating, holidays where I told friends I was busy because explaining the truth took too much energy. I thought about all the times I needed a family and didn't have one, and I asked myself something I never dared to before. If they weren't my parents, would I allow these people back into my life? The answer came instantly. No. When I got home, my fiance was waiting on the couch. She didn't say anything at first. She just reached for my hand. That simple gesture reminded me that I wasn't alone anymore. I told her everything, every message, every implication, every subtle attempt to twist the situation back onto me. She listened without interrupting, without defending them, without telling me what I should do. When I finished, she said something that stuck with me. "They're asking for a role in your future without taking responsibility for your past." That was exactly it. They wanted to walk me down the aisle of life without acknowledging the road they pushed me off of. The next day, I decided to be direct. I messaged my parents and told them I needed a conversation not about the wedding, but about what happened all those years ago. I said I needed honesty. I said I needed accountability. I told them this wasn't optional. If they wanted to be part of my life again, this was the starting point. They agreed, reluctantly. We scheduled a video call. I hadn't seen them face to face in almost 8 years. When the screen lit up, I felt my chest tighten. They looked older, yes, but also familiar in a way that stirred memories I'd spent years trying to dull. My mom smiled nervously. My dad sat stiffly, arms crossed. Emily wasn't on the call. That was the first thing I noticed. I asked where she was. My mom said she didn't think it was necessary for Emily to be involved in this conversation. I told her it was non-negotiable. After a tense pause, my dad finally said they'd talk to her later and relay the important parts. That was when I realized they still wanted control over the narrative. I didn't let them dodge it. I asked them to walk me through that night, what they thought happened, why they believed it, why they never questioned it. My mom spoke first. She said Emily was hysterical. She said she'd never seen her so afraid. She said a parent's instinct is to protect. I asked her why protecting Emily meant destroying me. She didn't answer. My dad said something that stunned me. We couldn't take any chances, as if I had been a risk to manage instead of a son to protect. I asked if they ever considered that Emily might have been lying. My mom shook her head immediately. She wouldn't do that. I reminded her that kids lie all the time, that fear and jealousy can make people say terrible things. My dad's jaw tightened. "You expect us to believe you over her?" That sentence landed like a punch. It didn't matter how many years had passed. They still didn't believe me. I told them something I had never said out loud before. That being thrown out wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing that my parents never actually knew who I was. They saw a version of me shaped by fear and assumption, and they clung to it because it was easier than admitting they'd made a catastrophic mistake. My mom started crying. She said she felt like she was being attacked. She said she was doing her best back then. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just told her calmly that intentions don't erase consequences. Then my dad said something that changed everything. "Emily was struggling back then. You were older. We assumed you could handle it." I stared at him, speechless. They sacrificed me because I was stronger, because I didn't cry loud enough, because I didn't fall apart in ways that demanded attention, because I was easier to lose. When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. I wasn't angry. I was grieving the parents I thought I had, grieving the family I hoped I could still recover. That night, Emily finally messaged me again. She said our parents told her about the call. She said she felt blindsided. She said bringing up the past was unnecessary. And then she said something I'll never forget. "Why can't you just let it go?" It's not like your life turned out bad. There it was. The truth. My pain only mattered if it ruined me. That message made something click into place. They didn't want forgiveness. They wanted absolution. They wanted my success to erase their guilt. And I realized I had a choice to make, one that would define not just my wedding, but the rest of my life. Emily's message stayed on my screen long after I read it. It's not like your life turned out bad. I don't think she understood how much that sentence revealed. To her, the outcome justified everything. The fact that I survived, no, that I thrived, meant the damage didn't count. Like pain only matters if it leaves you broken forever. I didn't reply. For the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself to her. In the weeks that followed, wedding planning picked up speed. Guest lists, seating charts, vendors, deadlines. Every time I saw the words family section or parents of the groom, my chest tightened. My fiance asked me gently if I wanted to leave those spaces blank for now. I told her yes, not because I was undecided, but because I needed time to sit with what I was about to do. Because once I made this choice, there was no undoing it. My parents didn't wait long before reaching out again. This time, the tone was sharper. My mom said she felt shut out. My dad said relatives were asking questions. They said it looked bad that they weren't involved. That part made me pause. It wasn't about missing my wedding. It was about appearances. I asked them something I probably should have asked years ago. Are you reaching out because you miss me or because people are starting to notice I'm gone? They didn't answer directly. Instead, my mom said something about family unity and forgiveness. My dad said holding grudges only hurts everyone involved. I told them I wasn't holding a grudge. I was holding a boundary. They didn't like that word. A few days later, my aunt, my mom's sister, called me. She hadn't spoken to me since the year I was kicked out. She said she wanted to understand my perspective. At first, I felt hopeful. Maybe someone was finally listening. But within minutes, it became clear why she was really calling. She said my parents were heartbroken. She said Emily had grown so much. She said weddings are about bringing families together. Then she said, you don't want to regret this someday. That word again, regret, as if protecting myself was something I'd eventually be ashamed of. I asked her if she'd ever questioned the accusation. She went quiet. Then she said, we trusted your parents. Exactly. Everyone trusted someone else. And I was the only one left without anyone. After that call, I realized something uncomfortable. If I let my parents come to my wedding without addressing the truth, I would be teaching them and everyone else that what they did was acceptable, that I would always be the one expected to bend. I thought about standing at the altar, looking out into the crowd, and seeing my parents smiling proudly. I imagined my sister sitting nearby, accepted and supported, never having taken responsibility for what she did, and I felt sick. That wasn't peace, that was surrender. So I did something I'd been avoiding. I wrote a message to my parents that was honest, calm, and final. I told them I loved them, but that love didn't mean access. I told them I couldn't invite them to my wedding unless they were willing to fully acknowledge what happened, including the possibility that Emily lied and that they failed me. I told them I wasn't asking for perfection. I was asking for truth. I sent the message and turned my phone face down. The reply came the next morning. It was long. My mom said she felt attacked and blamed. She said revisiting the past was reopening wounds. She said Emily had already suffered enough. My dad said they stood by their decisions. He said they did what any parents would do. He said they wouldn't apologize for protecting their daughter. That last sentence told me everything. Protecting Emily was still more important than acknowledging me. They ended the message by saying they were disappointed in my choice and hoped I'd come to my senses before the wedding. No apology, no accountability, just disappointment. I felt oddly calm after reading it. Not relieved, not happy, just certain. That night, I told my fiance my decision. My parents would not be invited. Neither would Emily. She didn't hesitate. She didn't argue. She didn't try to play mediator. She hugged me and said, I'm proud of you. I didn't realize how badly I needed to hear that. Word spread faster than I expected. Relatives started reaching out, some supportive, others critical. A few said they admired my strength. Others said I was tearing the family apart. One message stood out. It was from my grandmother on my dad's side. We hadn't spoken in years. She said, I always wondered why you disappeared. That sentence hit me hard because it meant the truth had never been told fully. It meant silence had done exactly what it was meant to do, hide the mess. As the wedding date got closer, I thought I'd feel guilt. Instead, I felt lighter. For the first time in my life, I wasn't shaping my choices around fear of disappointing people who never protected me. But just when I thought things had settled, Emily showed up, unannounced. At my door, when I opened the door and saw Emily standing there, my first thought was that my mind was playing tricks on me. She looked different. Older, obviously, but not just that. More composed, more confident. She was dressed neatly, hair pulled back, arms crossed tightly like she was bracing herself for impact. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Then she said my name. Hearing it out loud, after so many years of silence, felt strange, too familiar, like a sound from a life I no longer lived. "I just want to talk," she said. Every instinct in me screamed to shut the door. But another part of me, the part that had spent years waiting for this moment, wanted answers. So I stepped aside and let her in. We sat at opposite ends of the living room. The distance between us felt deliberate, necessary. Emily looked around like she was taking inventory of my life. The furniture, the photos on the wall, the framed engagement picture she paused on just a little too long. "So," she said quietly, "you're really not inviting us." I didn't correct her use of us. "No," I said, "I'm not." She sighed and rubbed her hands together. "Mom's been crying nonstop." That was her opening move. Not "I'm sorry," not "I was wrong," but "look what you're doing to them." I told her I wasn't interested in guilt. Her expression hardened slightly. "I came here because I thought maybe hearing it from me would change your mind." I asked her what she wanted me to hear. She said she never intended for things to go that far back then. She said she felt overwhelmed, scared, and ignored. She said she didn't think anyone would actually kick me out. I asked her again, slowly this time, "Did you lie?" She looked down at the floor. For a moment, I thought she might actually say it. Instead, she said, "I said what I felt." That answer was carefully chosen. I told her feelings aren't facts. She shrugged. They were to me. I reminded her of the consequences, of sleeping on couches, of losing my family overnight, of rebuilding my life alone while she stayed safe and protected. She listened quietly, arms still crossed. When I finished, she said something that made my stomach drop. "You always land on your feet. You were strong." I wasn't. There it was again, strength as a liability. I asked her if she'd ever tried to correct the story, if she'd ever told our parents that things weren't what they believed. She hesitated. Then she said, "At some point, it didn't feel like it mattered anymore. A thing want, because the damage was already done, because admitting the truth would have cost her the version of herself everyone believed." I asked her why she was really there. She swallowed hard. "Because if you don't invite us," she said, "people are going to start asking why." Not because she missed me, not because she felt remorse, but because silence was no longer enough to protect her. I told her I wasn't responsible for maintaining a lie that destroyed my life. Her voice rose slightly. "So what? You want me to confess? Ruin everything?" I looked at her and felt something shift. Not anger, not hatred, just distance. "I want honesty," I said. "And if that ruins things, then they were built on something fragile to begin with." She stood up abruptly. "I didn't think you'd be this cold," she said. That stung, but not for the reason she intended. Cold was how they described me when I stopped begging. I told her I wasn't cold. I was done sacrificing myself for her comfort. She shook her head, grabbed her bag, and walked toward the door. Before she left, she turned back and said something that sealed everything. "If you do this, don't expect to be forgiven." I almost laughed. Forgiveness from the person who never apologized. After she left, I sat in silence for a long time. My fiance came home later and found me still there, staring at the wall. I told her everything. She didn't ask if I was okay. She asked if I was proud of myself. And for the first time since this all started, the fallout was immediate. My parents sent a message saying Emily was devastated, that I had been cruel, that I was forcing the family to relive trauma. I didn't respond, because for once, their reaction wasn't my responsibility. As the wedding day approached, I expected more confrontations, more pressure, more attempts to change my mind. But instead, something unexpected happened. A relative reached out with proof, something that would finally bring the truth into the open. End of part 5. Say part 6 when you're ready to continue. Part 6, part 6. I was kicked out for my sister's false accusation. Now they want to be included in my wedding. The message came from someone I hadn't spoken to since high school. It was my cousin Mark. We were never particularly close, but we'd spent enough family holidays together that I recognized his name immediately. When I saw his message request, my first instinct was to ignore it. By that point, I was exhausted from family drama, but the first line stopped me cold. I don't know if you remember this, but I think you deserve to see it. Attached was a screenshot. At first glance, it didn't look like much. Just a grainy photo of a phone screen, clearly taken years ago. I zoomed in, my heart pounding harder with every second. It was a group chat. Dated the same week I was kicked out. Emily's name was right there. I read it once, then again, then a third time, slower. My hands started shaking. In the messages, Emily was talking to one of her friends. She was venting, complaining about our parents paying more attention to me that week because I'd gotten into a college prep program. She said she felt invisible, angry, and then came the line that made my stomach drop. I told them I felt unsafe. I didn't think they'd actually kick him out, but now I can't take it back. I stared at those words for a long time. There it was, not an interpretation, not a misunderstanding, not feelings, a confession. Mark explained everything in the follow-up message. Back then, his sister had been close friends with Emily. When things blew up in our family, the chat had circulated quietly among a few people. No one showed it to my parents, no one confronted Emily. They assumed the adults would handle it. They never did. Mark said he'd recently found the old screenshot while cleaning out his phone and remembered my name. He said when he heard about the wedding drama, it didn't sit right with him. So he wrote, "I figured you should finally have the truth." I had waited 8 years for someone to believe me, and now I was holding proof that could burn everything down. I showed the screenshot to my fiance. She didn't say a word while reading it. When she finished, she looked at me with tears in her eyes, not of sadness, but of anger. "They let you lose everything," she said, "when this existed." That night, I barely slept, because now I had a new choice. I could stay quiet, protect my peace, and move on, or I could finally force the truth into the open. The next morning, I sent one message to my parents. "I have proof." They responded almost immediately, asking what I meant. I sent the screenshot. Then I waited. Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2. Finally, my mom called. Her voice was unsteady, confused, defensive. She said she didn't know what she was looking at. She said messages can be taken out of context. She said Emily was young and emotional. I asked her one question. "Is that Emily admitting she lied?" Silence. Then my dad took the phone. He sounded angry, but not at Emily. At me. "Why are you digging this up now?" he asked. That was the moment I knew. Even with proof in front of them, they were more concerned about disruption than truth. Emily called next, over and over. I didn't answer. She finally left a voicemail. Her voice was panicked. She said it wasn't fair. She said it was private. She said I was trying to ruin her life. She never said the words, "I'm sorry." She said, "You don't understand how hard that time was for me." And just like that, she made it about herself again. I sent one final message to the family group chat I hadn't spoken in for years. I didn't add commentary. I didn't accuse anyone. I just sent the screenshot. And then I left the chat. The fallout was immediate. Relatives started reaching out. Some apologized. Some asked questions. Some went quiet. My parents sent a message saying they needed time. Time, 8 years too late. 2 days later, my mom sent another message. For the first time in my life, it was different. She said she was sorry. Not carefully worded. Not defensive, just sorry. She said they had failed me. She said they were wrong. She said she didn't know how to fix it. I read it over and over. And I realized something surprising. An apology doesn't automatically heal old wounds, but it does change the conversation. The wedding was 2 weeks away, and now, for the first time, the truth was out. What I chose to do next would define how this story ended. My mom's apology sat on my phone for a long time before I replied. Not because I didn't believe it, but because believing it didn't magically undo everything. 8 years of absence doesn't disappear with a single message, no matter how sincere it sounds. I showed it to my fiance. She read it quietly, then looked at me. "What do you need right now?" she asked. That question mattered more than forgiveness ever could. My parents asked if we could meet in person. I agreed, but with conditions. "No, Emily, no rewriting history, no pressure about the wedding, just honesty." They accepted. When we met, it felt strange sitting across from them without the weight of authority hanging over me. I wasn't a kid anymore. I wasn't asking for permission or approval. I was setting terms. My mom cried almost immediately. She said she replayed that night over and over after seeing the messages. She said she couldn't believe how easily she'd accepted a version of events that required no questioning. My dad stayed quiet longer. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "I failed you," he said. Those words hit differently than any apology. Because they were specific, they asked about the wedding. I told them the truth. That I wasn't comfortable changing plans so close to the date. That trust doesn't rebuild on a deadline. That the wedding wasn't a bargaining chip or a test of forgiveness. They nodded. It wasn't easy for them, but for the first time, they didn't argue. Emily didn't reach out again. I heard through relatives that she was angry, that she felt exposed, that she said I went too far. Maybe I did. But sometimes the truth feels extreme to people who benefit from lies. The wedding day came faster than I expected. As I stood at the altar, I felt something I never thought I would: peace. Not because everything was resolved, but because I had finally chosen myself. The seats where my parents would have sat were empty, and that was okay, because every seat that was filled belonged to someone who had shown up for me when it mattered. When my fiance walked down the aisle, all the noise faded. All the years of doubt, fear, and abandonment fell away in that moment. I wasn't the kid who got kicked out anymore. I was a man building something new. After the wedding, my parents sent a card. They didn't ask for photos. They didn't complain. They simply congratulated us and said they hoped someday we could keep talking. I appreciated that. And for the first time, it felt like the door was open but not forced. I don't know what the future holds with my family. Maybe reconciliation, maybe distance, maybe something in between. What I do know is this: being strong shouldn't mean being disposable. Surviving shouldn't erase harm. And forgiveness should never come at the cost of self-respect. I lost my family once because I stayed silent. I won't make that mistake again. And for the first time in my life, that feels like enough.